Sam actually changed the title of this last project in a way that I really like.
Of which project?
Of the Why Art Happens Where.
Oh,
You framed it as Why Art Here, in parentheses, not there. Which I actually really liked. It's a very good shorthand way of sort of thinking about that. So, thank you. This is sort of an impossible project because it's one of those squishy things that every time you try and wrestle a definition up, you realize how impossible it is. It's sort of the why, what is art kind of question, right? So really the only way to kind of do it is to sort of say, okay, I'll pose this definition and then let's take a look at it this way. Or I'll pose this other definition. So basically we're thinking about it in terms of how you look at something depends on the lens that you use, right? Marketplace, the radio show, is not a business show. It looks at the world through the lens of business, right? It's what makes it popular, right? We look at the world through the lens of culture. You can have the lens of, athletics, right? So the premise of this story, I think, is we're not going to be so arrogant as to say this is the definitive, why art happens here, because we can't say that. What we can, however, do is ask why, ask the question and attempt to put a lens through which to try and answer, okay? And we've got several different ways of looking at it, several ways of being able to consider it. The LASA data is one, which Sam has been looking into, the Stage Alliance data. There's census data, which somebody else proposed looking at. Who was it that did that? That was you, that's right. There's others. There's the Pew Cultural Data Project, which looks at arts institutions and artists in all sorts of definitive ways. The LA County Arts Commission has also lots of data on this, and then there's the NEA. So essentially my premise is that we're not going to come up with the definitive why art happens here, but using whatever kind of declaration of the definition is, this is a way to look at it, and can we make some statements of correlation, right? So that's at the sort of basic level, and then the second level is the who's. What? No, I'm not going to do that. Somebody was objecting to all my charts and so.
There's just like pyramids and charts and they're useful.
So I look at the second level sort of as a who's talking, sort of what are the studies and correlations that have been made. And then finally, that top level, actually in this case, I think is who's doing things, right? Is a way of framing it. Who's doing things? What are the things that are happening? Because that's the way we can start to say, if we observe something happening or somebody doing something over here, then we trace it back to, okay, what are the conditions that made that possible here rather than over here? Then actually it makes sort of intellectual sense at being able to start to draw some correlations and some correlations to why, okay? And then part of that is who is the arts audience, is another way of framing it. Now, structurally for this project, we're sort of thinking of a little bit of a change. KCET, Drew and Juan started looking at your pitches and went, we're actually interested in this one from column A and this one from column B and two from column C and it was like this. But they don't actually all kind of neatly fit in the why art here category. So what we're thinking is that the KCET part of this is, because these partnerships with media are actually sort of experiments in themselves. So how do you work with, how do we kind of make working relationships, right? So we thought maybe it might be interesting to say that KCET, in effect, creates its own project out of our 3 projects, right? So that they may help with, or you might work with them on this one from arts education, or from contested spaces, or from why art happens here. But that we'll still do them in the 3 projects, but we have one partner who's kind of floating. And what they'd like to do is they'd like to make a narrative or link them together. And so Drew will talk about that. But
Would you make a chart?
Yeah. Kind of PowerPoint presentation. Chart of answer.
And so if you could talk about the stories that interest you within the where art happens. And,
Sure. And I think I actually will start asking the people who pitch the stories some more questions about it, just so we can learn a little bit more about it. So, Brian, I was really interested in your story about does place matter? Could you just talk to me about it?
Yeah, I mean, I want to know why, it's sort of in the context of the city of Los Angeles or Southern California maybe, we group ourselves and we separate ourselves into neighborhoods that tend to end up being like-minded folks. And so we have like the Silver Lake crowd, and we have the West Siders, and we have, you know, some of these separations have come about because of who people are, or what people want themselves to be. Other reasons for these segregations are socioeconomic or racial or whatever reasons. And so some areas have become more hotbeds for artistic creativity, and I wonder why those spaces. If it's the people, if it's the conditions of the community, if it's access to being able to get your work shown that makes a community more artistic. Does that matter at all in terms of why these places become more artistic communities or not? And then the opposite side of that is, well, where is this not happening? Or is it not happening? Or is there just a perception that it's not happening in certain places? Are there people creating art in communities that we don't think of as being artistic communities?
So how do you see this piece being shaped? Like, what would be the end product, and who would you talk to?
Yeah, I mean, I think I don't see this piece as being so much of a written piece. I see it being visualized somehow. I see probably some sort of map with, you know, bubbles and like you know, the temperature maps on the weather. Like, it's red if there's like a lot of activity, you know, in this area, and then in that space, you know, there are maybe video or audio or maybe short text or slideshow or some sort of representations of what's happening in these spaces. That's where you go and you talk to artists and you talk to local business owners, and you talk to gallery owners, and why is this gallery here and not somewhere else? So I see the story ending up being almost this one sort of image that has a lot of texture and ability for users to kind of chart their own course through the experience of the story.
So you're thinking about an interactive piece.
Yeah.
And have you started researching the different ways to realize that?
I have not started researching the realization of that yet, and that's something, I mean, in my pitch, you know, I mentioned I would need help.
What kind of help would you need?
I'm not a creator of great graphical material on the computer. I can explain what I think is a viable realization, to make it happen, I would need someone who can say, well, here's where you go to write this kind of code and turn this into a visualization.
So the end product is you need to assemble a team.
Yes, yes.
And so how do you see that team breaking down? And how would you find it?
I mean, it would be working with people in this room and it would be working with fellows. Yeah.
But what do you need specifically?
I need a good map.
So you need graphics.
I need graphics people. And I don't even know, I mean, I don't even know what are some of the best options out there for expressing visually kind of the story that I'm thinking. And so that's why, I mean, I would love to sit down and talk with a team of really smart people about coming up. I feel like I've come to a point with this pitch and I kind of have an idea of how I would want to express it. But then that next step of like, well, this practically wouldn't work, or this would be a good idea. And that's where I've really been interested in watching kind of the fellows chime in on Basecamp and see like, oh my God, I've never heard of some of the stuff that I go to.
And I think we can pair you up with some.
Yeah.
Okay.
You also mentioned in your pitch, needing Sam's discoveries from the LA Stage Alliance.
Yeah. Stage Alliance and the census stuff too. I mean, it's like
Census.
overlaying all of that is a pathway to a lot of good information.
I just want to say for the record that I still have trouble with this one, and to me what will be most interesting about it will be to see how you and your team define art. I think it'll say as much about because I think the premise is that more art is made in Silver Lake than in Van Nuys. That's kind of what we've said, and I don't buy that. So
I don't buy that either. I
Okay.
mean, I can,
Some
that's
sorts
the
of art, but
conventional,
are they more than
that's the conventional thought, I think.
And wouldn't it be fantastic if we could disprove that?
I'd love to.
Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, in fact, that's sort of the interesting premise
Yeah,
for this,
exactly.
for this project, right?
Yeah.
Is, we have conventional ways of looking at this, and we sort of have shorthand ways of referring to communities and what they do and what they look like and all of that.
Yeah.
And if you could actually sort of say, oh, this isn't a desert at all, it's,
Yeah.
And what KCET has been doing is going into those places
Right.
already. I mean,
Right.
what Juan was saying about Whittier the other day and Boyle Heights and all of these places.
The name of the game, and I think you say it really well in your pitch, and this is interesting, is the pathway between who's making the art and who's consuming it, and where is there a disjunct. So it addresses exactly what you're saying, is finding the gaps
Yeah.
and the correlations.
and the correlation.
Yeah.
And for me, it's figuring out what is the realistic end product.
Right.
Because of, at some point, it would be great to create an interactive map and things like that. And if you can put a team together and project manage it and do all of that, like that'd be really interesting. But also, I mean, is it a think piece? Is it, I mean, your original question here, does place matter? Yeah, I think it's almost a different thing than what we were talking about. In the sense that you're on one stage, you're talking about data and all of this, but just abstractly, does place matter? As a think piece is something that we could definitely develop as well. Like where you could talk to different artists in areas and see how has their environment influenced or not influenced where they're from. Because, I mean, just earlier I was talking about Odd Future, right? This rap group that comes from Baldwin Hills. And so much of the narrative about them was, oh, they're from South LA, they're all of this, but they're middle class kids, and so their place actually didn't really matter as much as what they were doing.
Yeah.
And so many arts journalists were taking this one angle on the story because it just seemed to go that one way, but really it didn't. So that's something that I'd be interested in.
Yeah, I love that.
Also, Helena,
Yeah.
could you tell me more about the arts, about the museum becoming more participatory? Oh,
I mean, so are you saying if someone's middle class, it doesn't matter where they're from?
no. No.
Okay.
Anyways, museums are becoming more participatory. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, well, art museums are they're gonna have to prove their value, their relevance for the public nowadays, because they're the amount of audience or visitors is going down. It shows, I mean, you can even see it in the statistics. And in order to do that, they organize these events and happenings and classes, which are probably not necessarily related to the art.
Sure.
It can also be something totally else, like yoga or beer events or whatever. And they are turning basically these museums into pretty happening places. And I visited now I visited 3 museums and 3 happenings, and they've been very interesting, and people are very into them. And then I've been talking to the directors of programming a little bit more about it, and they are actually pretty worried about the future of museums, and that's why they really want to put emphasis on these programs. And
Where do you get your data that attendance at museums is down?
it was in my it's in NEA, the survey
You
2000
have
from
to be
2008.
really skeptical of that.
Yeah. Well, it said galleries and museums.
Yeah, but definitionally, it's really problematic, the
Okay.
definitions they use for that. Because if you look at, there are other statistics about museum attendance which show it continuing to go up.
Okay.
So like, for instance, in New York, MoMA and the Met are
Yeah,
opening
the
the
biggest
7th
ones.
day.
Yeah.
And there's not, it's problematic to say that museum
All
attendance is
yeah.
going down. It's sort of spotty here and there.
Right, right.
It's actually very difficult to track.
Yeah, and the problem is also the fact, it's also, you can, there's also the fact that there's a lot more museums now than there used to be. So,
Right.
I mean, in that sense, it might be difficult to look at this chart or surveys. But I mean, the small museums can have problems I mean, the big museums like Metropolitan or MoMA obviously are doing really well. But like the smaller ones are facing problems in order to get people in. And that's why they come up with these things, which are very interesting.
And when you talk about beer events, that takes the museum, which had been in the best of all possible worlds, is a public space,
Yeah,
and it privatizes certain aspects of it. Because the beer event is sponsored by a private company.
right. I mean, often these events can be organized by private. Like, I mean,
So that's contested space.
and and it's also like, or they're organized in collaboration, like with a yoga school, for
Yeah.
instance.
Yeah, or sometimes they will lend their art objects to private entrepreneurs.
That's another issue, yeah.
Because the thing that I'm super interested in is this idea of the audience becoming engaged with the museum,
Yeah.
but not so much in consumption, but instead creating art with a museum. Because there's different programs where people,
Yeah.
they're bringing in the audience to be a part of the gallery itself,
Right.
And I know that at LACMA, I think it was last year, they had late night DJ events where different DJs were composing pieces for different sculptures.
Mhm.
And then when people would come in, if they were able to engage these spaces in different ways,
Yeah.
like making dance parties around, pieces of art that are usually off limits, quote unquote. So things like that, like ways of redefining the museums and bringing in more people.
Yeah, but like yoga class in a museum space is all about, when I was talking to the director of the museum, she said that it's all about like making people stay in one place and actually admire the art for the whole hour. Because there's statistics that people look at a piece of art approximately 8 seconds at a time. So when you have to spend 1 hour there, you end up consuming the art in a different way.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah,
And also the meditative state can.
exactly. Yeah,
Really interesting.
yeah.
So how would you see this piece?
Well, I'm already working on it. I'm gonna make a small documentary about it, about 8 minutes long.
Okay.
Yeah, and I've also talked with Mark Allen, from Machine Projects, who has his own visions and ideas about where museums are going and what the goal is.
Yeah.
And
Mark-
he actually thinks it's not even important that people go there just look at art. It's more about experiencing the artistic space.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Mark Allen's a really cool guy.
Yeah, he's very interesting.
And you're also building a website.
Yeah, in the end of the year, hopefully it's good. This is gonna be a Pinterest site of
Okay.
like different points of views on museums and like from different people from the same field. And I'm gonna include pictures and graphics and stuff on a Pinterest site so people can actually put more information on how they think the museums are gonna develop.
And how do you see KC&T working with that? Like, what do you want us to do?
Well, I think this documentary might be interesting for your viewers, and I mean maybe this Pinterest site would be interesting for you too. I mean I don't know if you're interested in, I mean I know you have Pinterest site, but how you want to develop that. This is one way of making an article on Pinterest, an arts journalism piece on Pinterest. So that's what I want to explore.
Cool. And Sam, can you tell me more about the data mapping of these?
Yeah, well, Terrence McFarland came and spoke with us, I think, maybe 2 or 3 weeks ago at this point. Basically what they've done is they've worked with established arts organizations all throughout the greater Los Angeles area. And they have called data on, I think it's 4 million households just based on the transactions of purchasing tickets. And then from there they send the data of the 101 arts organizations they work with. They send it over to the US Census Bureau, and then they glean much more data about these actual households. So at this point in my own research, I'm still working to get my hands on that actual data, though hopefully that will happen first thing next week. See kind of what the possibilities are for us to generate some kind of mapping device to really understand where people are consuming art in LA. And then the other really interesting thing that comes from this data is that you can see crossover. So if someone is really interested in theater, maybe you can also find some kind of crossover interest in, gardening or whatever other hobbies